Despite a likely victory for the yes camp, Kurdistan finds itself increasingly isolated as neighbors close their borders and lawmakers in Baghdad threaten to deploy troops.
Well, for more on this, we can cross live now to Rome to speak with Marco Vicenzino, who is an expert in geopolitics and director of the Global Strategies Project. Thank you very much for talking to us here on France 24. Just why are the UN and the US so opposed to the independence referendum we've just seen in Iraqi Kurdistan?
One key word would be destabilizing, and it's not just the US and the UN, but specifically the immediate neighbors where the KRG is, the Kurdish regional government, and also within Iraq itself, which technically the KRG is a part of on paper and recognized internationally. Right now, for the U.S. in particular, from the U.S. perspective, much of the region, when you're looking at Syria and Iraq, is through the prism of the war against ISIS. And they see the timing of this referendum as damaging to that, as ISIS is in the process of being somewhat defeated or eventually go underground. For the UN, they see it also as destabilizing also because from their perspective, they look at territorial integrity of member states of the UN. This once again can set a precedent. In the last 2 decades, there have been several cases of places around the world whereby they've separated from the countries that were recognized at one stage. So for the UN right now, the timing, they're looking at the region, the US, and particularly if you look at it, there's a regional dynamic. The immediate neighbors of Iraq, if you look at Turkey, the situation in Syria, Iran, and once again, the central government in Baghdad. And one of the places where you can see one of the flashpoints where this destabilization can actually come to armed violence is in the city of Kirkuk, which is obviously, there's the oil factor, it's very rich in oil, but also it's a city that's a mosaic. It's not just ethnic Kurds, but also Arabs, Turkmen. It's a mosaic of a city in terms of minorities, and it's there that you can see a potential flashpoint. So far, there's been jubilation within Iraq, but within the Kurdish regional government. But the minorities is an issue, and once again, you look at the surrounding countries. This has the potential for being somewhat of a catastrophic. One would even use the word disastrous. We haven't seen it yet, but the potential there is very high.
And now we are, of course, expecting a resounding yes vote. But is there any real hope, really, if we think about it, of Iraq's Kurds declaring an internationally recognised state at some point in the near future?
So a lot of the Kurdish leadership right now has changed tone ever since, in the last 24 to 48 hours. They're saying this is not an immediate spark for independence, but a starting point. It provides the mandate to their leadership to negotiate separation from Iraq. So for those who say that it's not, from their perspective, it's not immediate independence. There's been a change of tone. They're looking upon this as an opportunity to say that we have a mandate, but the process heading towards independence, I think is a slow-moving process. But during that process, once again, I keep using that word explosive and destabilizing. You look, for example, the rhetoric coming from Turkey, from President Erdogan. He says all options are open. The Iranians, for example, they closed their airspace to flights coming from the Kurdish regional area day before the election. Iraq already, the central government in Baghdad is somewhat, is mobilizing its forces in certain places within Iraq. There's certain regions between the Kurdish regional government and the central government in Baghdad, which are potential flashpoints, apart from Kirkuk, which I mentioned earlier. And then you look at the situation in in the east of Syria, northeastern Syria, whereby the local Kurds there, they see it's their time also, and they've been emboldened. So you have the largest stateless ethnicity in the world, technically, are Kurds, around 30 million people, divided generally between Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey. Those countries is where there's going to be it can be not just economic, diplomatic, but potential military confrontation in certain parts. Once again, it's a mosaic, the whole region. If you look at the borders that were set after the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles, many of those borders between the areas of Syria and Iraq, and if you look between Turkey, Iraq, and the Kurdish regional area, these are, from the Kurdish perspective, these borders are no longer valid from their perspective. They tried to get independence 100 years ago. ago, they were denied it, and from their perspective, their time has come. That's their reality, but the reality from their neighbors and in the international community, it's not just the U.S. and the UN. You're looking also at the European powers. They have reservations. There's no really country that supports their independence. Technically, there's one, the State of Israel. It has its political reasons and its diplomatic reasons for doing so. But if you look at it from a broad international perspective, you know, it's something that's destabilizing. And there's also an internal factor within the Kurdish regional government itself. Many of the critics of President Barzani, Masoud Barzani, are saying that he's using this issue emotionally to extend his own power. He's already extended his stay in power beyond 2 years, and he wants to use this issue of the referendum to cement his power for even a longer term. So we have dynamics at all levels, within the KRG, within Iraq, within the region, and beyond the international community.
Now, you mentioned it briefly a little earlier. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey has just said that all options, from economic to air and land military measures, were now on the table in response to the Kurdish referendum. Is it just hot air from him, or would he really be ready to deploy force?
He's already deployed forces on the border, and traditionally, you've looked in previous decades, there's been several incursions by Turkish troops into the KRG, into northern Iraq. So any kind of incursion wouldn't really be something new. Obviously, under the current circumstances, it would be a lot more controversial. But I think whereby President Erdogan, his first line of defense in terms would be the economic sanctions. The oil coming out of the KRG obviously has to go through the pipelines in Turkey, and he himself said it. We control the valves, and we can turn those valves off whenever we want. Obviously, for Turkey's economic situation internally, if you cut off those valves, it's not that they would just be cutting off the valves with the Kurdish, the KRG would be suffering. Also, the Turkish economy could take a toll because they're also making money off of that flow of oil and through the pipelines. So I would say his first line of defense would be on the economic side. His rhetoric right now is saying all options are open. Could it reach the point of some kind of military confrontation, of reintroducing Turkish troops into northern Iraq? Yeah, definitely can. I mean, this is a very volatile situation. In the midst of this volatility, anything is possible. You cannot exclude anything. It can turn out to be a slow process whereby everyone is playing a diplomatic game, or it can actually spin out of control in terms of a security confrontation, a military confrontation amongst the various powers. Once again, just not Turkey, but the other powers in the region, and particularly between the forces of the central government in Baghdad and the forces of the KRG.
Marco Vicenzino in Rome, Director of the Global Strategies Project. Thank you very much indeed.